Hello everyone, thanks for joining in. Today we are going to cover these four topics. First, how to change the priority of any router in multi-access segment to make it as DIS. And second, how to configure ISIS in multiple area. And third, what is the concept of totally stubby area. And fourth one, how can we minimize resource utilization. So let's start with the topology first. So this will be topology for today. So we are using one loopback for each router, like 1.1.1.1 for router 1, 2.2.2.2 for router 2, 3.3.3.3 for router 3, 4.4.4.4 for router 4. Similarly, for R5 and R6. And we are using the subnet 12.1.1.0/24 between R1 and R2. Between R2 and R3, we are using subnet 23.1.1.0/24. Between R3 and R4, we are using subnet 34.1.1.0/24. Between R4 and R5, 45.1.1.0/24. And between R5 and R6, we are using subnet 56.1.1.0/24. And we are using here three areas: 49.0001, 49.0002, and 49.0003. So let's configure this. So let's take the console of router 1 first. So let's configure. So let me show you that we have already configured the IP address in each router. So here we can see that 12.1.1.1 in G1 by 0 and 1.1.1 as a loopback, right? So let's configure the ISIS first. So the command will be router ISIS. So we have already seen the last video, we covered the single area configuration, right? So let's do again for all the areas. So the command is router ISIS. Now inside that we'll have to configure the net ID. So the command is 49.0001, that is our area ID. After that we'll have to configure system ID that represents our router ID. So 0000.0000.0001. So 1 is representing the router 1, and then dot 00 for router, or we can say intermediate system. So let's call ISIS inside the interface. So interface is G1 by 0, and IP router ISIS is the command to call ISIS inside the interface. And we need to call ISIS inside the loopback interface. So loopback 0 IP router ISIS, right? So let's move on router 2. So let's configure the ISIS router ISIS, and net ID is 49.0001, and the system ID is 48-bit character 000000000002 and last 00, and the interface is G1 by 0 IP router ISIS, and interface loopback 0 IP router ISIS, and we have one more interface that is G2 by 0. So interface G2 by 0 IP router ISIS. So here we can see that it will establish the neighbor relationship with R1. So the command is ISIS neighbor. So here R2 has established the neighborship with R1, and it will create a two database, L1 database and L2 database. And here we can see that R2 is a DIS because it has the higher system ID. So we can here manipulate that. So let's go on R1. We can increase the priority of the interface. So what it will do that the when we will increase the priority, then R1 will become as a DIS. So now R2 is there, but after changing the priority, let's see interface G1 by 0 ISIS priority 100. Actually by default priority is 64, so we will increase to 100. So after changing the priority, R1 has become DIS. So here we can see that it immediately participate in the elections. So in OSPF we need to reset the process, but in ISIS it's not required. So we can say that ISIS is preemptive, but OSPF is not, right? So let's configure the area 49.002. So before that, let's check that we have configured the ISS on G2 by 0 or not. Yeah, we have already called. So let's configure the ISIS in R3 and R4. R3 config T router ISIS net ID is 49.0.0.0.2 and system ID is 000000000003.00. Now interface G2 by 0 IP router ISIS interface G3 by 0 IP router ISIS interface loopback 0 IP router ISIS. Okay, now let's move on R4. Config T router ISIS net 49.0002 and then system ID 0000000004 and then 00. Now we'll have to call the ISIS inside interface. So interface G3 by 0 and then IP router ISIS G3 by 0 and then G4 by 0 as well. We'll have to call the ISIS and interface loopback 0 IP router ISIS. So here we will see that R4 will establish the neighborship with R3. So ISIS neighbor. So it will create a two database, L1 database and L2 database. So here we will see that R4 should have the loopback IP of R1 as well. So IP route ISIS. So we will be able to ping R1 loopback, right? It's reachable. So let's configure the R5 and R6. So R5 is in area of 49.003. So command will be router ISIS. Net ID is 49.0003 and system ID will be 0000.0000.0005 and then here intermediate system is 00. Now we will call the ISIS in the inside interface. So our interface R5 interface is G4 by 0 IP router ISIS and G1 by 0 IP router ISIS and last interface loopback 0. Yeah. Now we'll have to go on R6. So here R6 only one interface, that is G1 by 0. So here we can see in interface brief output we have only one interface G1 by 0. But before that we'll have to configure the ISIS router ISIS net ID is 49.00003. Our area is 49.00003 and then system ID is 000000000006 and intermediate system is 00. Now interface is G1 by 0 IP router ISIS and interface loopback 0 IP router ISIS. So we can see that R6 will establish the neighborship with R5. So ISIS neighbor and it should have routes of R1 loopback. Yeah. So it should be pingable. So each router is reachable with all the other routers, right? So suppose that in this area we have around prefix 1000, right? And in this area we have around prefixes 2000. Okay. And in our organization, this router is installed as a very less memory router, right? It cannot handle that much 3000 routes. So how can we optimize our network? So here we can see that R6 has, so ISIS neighbor. So here we can see that R6 has established the neighborship with R5, and it has created the two database, L1 database and L2 database. And we can also see in detail that so ISIS database detail. So it's preparing the L1 database. In that it will include all the internal area routes, and it will also creating the L2 database, level 2 database, where all the other areas routes is present there, right? So how can we how can we optimize our network? So to optimize that, we can do one more thing here, that we can make this router as only level 1 router, so that it can prepare only one database, right? And if he needs to get the routes from the other areas, or we can say external routes, so it will take as a default route. So when we will make this router as a level 1 router, and we will make this router as a level 1 2 router, because we cannot make this router as a level 1, because this router is going to connect with another area. So if I will make this router as a level 1, then it will not communicate to another area, right? So in the last lecture we already discussed that if any router is going to connect any other area, then it has to make as a level 2 router, right? So we have to make this router as a level 1 2 router, so that it can communicate, or we can say it can establish the L1 neighborship with internal routers, and it can make the neighborship as a L2 router, right? So we will make this router as a level 1 2 router, and we will make this router as a level 1 router. So when we will make that, so this area will be considered as totally stubby area. What is totally stubby area? In totally stubby area, so I hope folks you remember in OSPF that when we will make any area as totally stubby area, then LSA 5, LSA 4 and LSA 3, all these LSA's prefixes is blocked, and those areas router only will get a default route from ABR router. So here similarly we don't need to configure anything on the router. When we will make this router as a level 1 2, and we will make this router as a level 1, then by default this router will get only the internal area routes, and for external routes it will get only default routes. Similarly, here we'll also do the same thing. We will make this router as a level 1 2 router, so that it can communicate with different area routers, and also it can communicate to internal routers as well. And we will make router 1 as level 1 router, right? So it will prepare the database for L1 only, and it will prepare the two database, L1 database with R1 and L2 database with R3. Okay, so let's make that, and then I'll show you the difference. But before that, before applying, let me show you the routes of R1. So IP route ISIS. So here we can see that we have all the routes 2 3 4 5 6 23 34 45 56, right? So let's make this router as a L1. So the command will be router ISIS IS type level 1. Okay, so in router 2 we will not do anything, because by default level 1 2 is configured, all the routers by default will be considered as level 1 2, and we will make R6 as a level 1 router. So let's move on R6. Let's see the route table of R6 before applying. So here we can see that all the routes is there, right? 45, 34, 23, 12, 5, 4, 3, 2. So let's make this router as a level 1 router. So the command is router ISIS and IS type level 1, right? Now let's see the route table once again of our router 1. So IP router ISIS. See, only the internal routes, that is R2 loopback is there, and this is 23 1 dot. Okay, so this is the area routes, right? And this is the only default route is there. All the routes is disappeared, but still we will be able to ping the 6 loopback IP. Why it's unreachable? Why? Okay, so here we can see that it's reachable now. Okay, and in R6 as well we can see the output of routing table. So IP route ISIS. So only internal routes is there, that is 5.5.5.5 and 49 this is. Okay, so this is directly connected out, that's why 12 and 56 is not showing. But yeah, let me show you when I will show IP route. So let me show you the complete routing table. So here we can see that one loopback IP 12 and 23, because this is directly connected, that's why we are getting, and this is the router to loopback IP, and all the external routes is receiving a default route. And R6 similarly, so IP route, this is a complete routing table. So this is the 5 loopback IP, this is 6 router 6 loopback IP, and this is the R5 R6 segment IP, and this is the 45 that is directly connected with R5, right? And all the external routes is getting at 0000. So in this way we can optimize our network. But here still problem is there. So here in area 49.0002, here we can see that R3 and R4 is preparing the two database, right? L1 database and L2 database. So let me show you in R3 as well. So ISIS database detail. Let me maximize this screen. So here we can see that it's preparing the L1 database and as well as level 2 database. So do you think that it is required level 1 database and level 2 database? So here we can see that both these routers are connecting to the different areas. So this area will be considered as transit area. So I hope guys you remember that in OSPF there was one concept that is backbone area, right? In backbone area, all the different areas should be connected with the backbone area, that is area 0, either directly or indirectly. Indirectly means virtual link. But here there is no such restrictions in ISS. We can connect any areas to any different areas, right? So now we back to the our point, that is it required to prepare two database on this area? I will say no, because if I will make this router as a level 2 router, and this will also we will create as level 2 router, so there will be any issue, because R2 as a level 1 2 router and R5 is a level 1 2 router. So R4 will establish the neighbor relationship with R5 with L2 database, and R3 will share all the routes with R2 in L2 database only. And in internally we can also share all the routes as a L2. Why do we need to create a L1 database? So we need to keep remember that in the transit area, we can make our router as a L2 to optimize our network, right? So let's make that and see the difference here too. So this is the R3 database, this is level 2 database, and this is level 1 database. So let's optimize this. We will go in config mode and router ISIS, and then we will do this router as IS type level 2, and we will make R4 as L2 router, IS type level 2. Now we can try to ping once again R1 loopback IP from R6, ping 1.1.1 source loopback 0. So we will be able to ping, might be it take some time, but it should be reachable. Why it is stop pinging? It will take some time, but it should work. So let me check the route table. So it's I'm able to ping the self IPs, right? And here, okay, now it starts pinging, right? And we can do the vice versa. 6.6.6 source loopback 0, so it's pingable. So this was the agenda for today, folks. I hope you have learned something new today. So till the next video, I am signing off. Take care.